Hello everyone, this is Chris Legacy. We are rerunning a few videos. That's where we would get copyright problems. You know how it is. Sometimes months later after the video comes out, someone suddenly claims there's a copyright infringement, and we've learned the hard way. It's not even worth our time to actually argue about it. I mean, these people would even claim copyright on something like the last post, which has only been played since the 1800s at military funerals as well as at military bases across the world. But you know, some people, that's how they make their money. Let me not be sarcastic. So what we do now is we simply remove those things and we rebroadcast the episode. So what you're seeing here, you've probably seen before, but it's still a very good video, and so it's worth your while to watch it again. So that's what's happening here. So without further ado, let us carry on with the original video, minus whatever bothered YouTube so much. Thank you. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button as well as the bell to be notified of future videos. We are back. We've got the man himself here, Colonel Olivier. He's a friend of mine. He's Special Forces Police Special Task Force. Now, this is the second episode, and today we're going to talk to him about the SA Railway Police, the Special Task Force itself, and a little bit about the South African Police Force, and we'll see where it goes, I must tell you, he wrote a fantastic book. I've got the book. I actually read the book, and I'm going to put a picture on of the book here, and there's going to be links at the bottom as well as at the end of this video. Get hold of that book and read it. You will be very surprised at what comes out. It's about his faith. And I can tell you, this is a man of God. He's also a pastor, and he also has his own YouTube channel. And on his YouTube channel, he has many, many videos. And perhaps he should tell us what it's about. Colonel, you're welcome here. Thank you, sir. We really appreciate your time. I know you're a busy man, but can you tell us what happens on your YouTube channel?
Of course, yes, thank you once again to see you after so many years. We spent so much time together up in Nigeria when we were both stationed up there. And yeah, it was a pleasure to have met you then, and also a pleasure now. Yes, in terms of the YouTube channel, you know, I've always had a yearning to reach out to the military veterans and police veterans. And you will recall up in Nigeria, amongst others, there were 64 expats, all of them basically ex-military police and so on. And yeah, I think except for two of us, everybody was divorced and had, a problem and so on. And you will recall one guy, I actually buried him recently, Ben de Klerk, that was up there with us. He actually wanted to commit suicide. And yeah, I walked the path with him, and he got to know the Lord, and he gave his heart to the Lord, and his wife Tessa. And we rode together as veterans as well at the Motorcycle Association, and he got COVID and he died. I actually spoke to him on the Monday, and the Wednesday he died, and the Friday I buried him. But that's the type of service over and above my day job that I'm doing for the veterans and so on. So the YouTube channel is specific, short little sermons, 10, 11 minutes long, because many people are busy and don't have time. And there's 5 sermons that I would like the veterans to listen to. There's 2 specifically on PTSD that I believe really every veteran should listen to. Even if you don't suffer on PTSD, you'll know somebody who does. And I just want to say this, because of the violence in the world today, and in South Africa, and farm attacks and hijackings, it's not just ex-soldiers, it's our children, it's our neighbors that are suffering from PTSD. So it will benefit the people to have a look at that. Then, if I can get back to, I think, what we're talking about today, the South African Railway Police Special Task Force. You know, many times if you look at the traffic police today, it says police. So I want to be very clear today. I'm going to talk about the South African Railway Police Special Task Force. Where does it come from? Where does the railway police come from? And you know, how does it fit into the international arena as well? Because remember, even, let's say for argument's sake, an aircraft is hijacked in Mogadishu. It becomes our problem in a couple of hours because it lands on our soil. What's the difference between a criminal and a terrorist, you know, and so on? Where does the mandate, the legal mandate, come from? You being an advocate will know your source document is the legal document, the Constitution, the Act of Parliament, and so on. And that is what I'm going to touch on just a little bit, Chris. I think as an introduction, I need to give context. What was happening in the world in the late 70s, early 80s? Bearing in mind that, you remember, Kufut was established in 79. So we were in a bush war at that stage. All of the training was more counterinsurgency, rural operations, you know, TB stig daar in die bos en mortiere skiet en al daai tipe van goed. You can't do that in an aircraft. You can't do that in a train or in a bus or on a passenger ship or so on. So the training had to change. The doctrines had to change. The type of, let's then call it operator that you were looking for had to change. And a lot of psychological selection went into that as well. But I want to use 2 things as a base. One, I want to look at the legal basis. If you don't have a legal basis, you're operating illegally. And secondly, what's extremely important is to look at the timeline that I've just alluded to. In other words, where did we start moving from rural to urban? Because I can tell you, not just in South Africa, but in many places in the world, the special forces were caught off guard when we started to have criminal activities going into hostage situations like the Stockholm Syndrome that we all talk about and know about and so on. So we always need to remember that the primary victim, and this is extremely important, was when an aircraft or whatever is hijacked, the primary victim is the government of the day. It's not the passengers or whoever on board, because they want to put pressure on the government to release political prisoners or to do certain things. So the onus is then actually on the government to attend to that, to release the pressure. Because if you have an aircraft, you have many different nationalities on board that aircraft. And all the governments are then putting pressure on the flag carrier. If it's a South African Airways aircraft, it will be on the South African government. But this was happening all around the world. And if you go and do a study of this, you can actually see how the tendency changed up until when the people started to take high businessmen like the Baider-Meinhof group hostage and for ransom and put pressure on the government. They later on also moved to aircraft hijacks. And that was here in the 70s going into the 80s. So bearing in mind that Kufut was established in 79, the Railway Police Task Force was established in 1980. But that was the second time round. But let me not run ahead of myself. I want to try and chronologically go through this. So bearing in mind that the government stays the primary victim in a situation. So then the government must then decide, in terms of their constitution, who is responsible for what? What statutory force must do what? and what government departments must do what. You know, we will think now that it's just the police or just the military, but it's not. There are other government departments like Arms Corps that had to get the special equipment for us. Speciale verkrygings by Krygkorps. Don Wilmot was die ou wat dit gedoen het. Ek ken Don tot vandag toe, ons sien mekaar van tyd tot tyd. Then you have foreign affairs. You have the different units, 17 Squadron, 19 Squadron. You have the Navy, the Marines. All of those things had to work together as a collective to counter urban terrorism. Now, normally this little infighting that you find about who's good and who's bad and who's better and who's not, I don't get involved with stuff like that. I certainly don't. The people that I've brushed shoulders with on the reconnaissance units, on the South African police, in the Defence Force, I've always had a very professional working relationship. Always. There's mutual respect. And particularly when you go onto a course together and you go onto the shooting range and you start shooting and you shoot better than the guy next to you, then he's got to keep quiet because you proved yourself. Or you can perhaps do 2 push-ups more than him or 2 pull-ups. So it was fun. And I really enjoyed that. So the government then decides by legislation what is the responsibility in urban terrorism of the South African Defence Force, of the South African Police, and of the South African Railway Police. Because each one had a mandate legally in terms of South African legislation. So we had the different stuff taking place all over the world. And I believe that the South African government, with the State Security Council, with all of the people sitting there, with the Bush War up in Rhodesia, with the Bush War in Angola, they had a lot of experience. They knew who was the commissioner of the police, who was the commissioner of the railway police. They knew what their abilities were, what they could achieve and not achieve. So they, with confidence, could make the necessary legislation to say, Defence Force, you're responsible for this. SAP, you're responsible for this. South African Railway Police, you're responsible for this. With confidence. They actually put it then in legislation. And where then this came to the fore really was when we had the State Security Council that brought out a policy directive. That, let me just go back to your question that you asked it in the beginning. Where does the railways come from and where does the railway police come from and so on? Now, anybody likes looking at Western movies, cowboys, skietskop and donner, né? When they did the Wild West, they always put in train tracks to get the economy going, to get the equipment into the Wild West and so on. Now, the same happened in South Africa. Way back in the 1860s already, the first railway started to transport goods, transport stuff, and so on to the areas that was being developed. But what few people know, of course, is that over the years, the South African railways and harbours developed extremely sophisticated workshops. That in the Second World War, those workshops were used to manufacture munitions. No, not very many people know that. The South African railways had an alternative national telephone grid other than Telkom. It was national. It was as good, if not better, than Telkom. And that was during the time when we really needed this type of stuff. And then also, we had engineers in the workshops. And these engineers actually designed, of course, a armored vehicle. I'm talking about in the early 80s. They designed an armored vehicle that would travel on the rail and on the road. Bearing in mind, of course, that a lot of our troops were transported by rail. It was our responsibility. A lot of the train lines were being sabotaged and blown up. It was our responsibility. That's now way back in the 70s that already started to happen. Now, there is a video that was made by the legendary Paul Ehlers called Draers van die Lourierkrans. I want to invite anybody to try and get hold of that video. And if they can't, I will make it available. Where a documentary was done of the railway police. All the different facets, the water wing, the task force, and all the different facets, also amongst others, this vehicle. So the Draers van die Lourierkrans by was aired many years ago, but it is available. And then also this workshop of the engineers, They designed the water cannons, the ontwrigtingsapparaat, the disruptive stuff that we used to defuse IEDs. We designed our own stuff. So maybe it's not very well known, but let me make it known now. The railways was a very sophisticated area with highly skilled engineers. And I can tell you to this day, I know one particular engineer is still involved designing armored vehicles today, because I'm also in that industry, as you know. So let us go back and have a look what was happening more or less in terms of the time scale. Where did South Africa come under pressure for the first time? It goes way back to the 24th of May, 1972. We had a South African Airways Boeing 727. The Boeing's name was Letaba. The captain was Blake Flemington, and he was flying from Salisbury, or Harare now today, to Johannesburg. There was a passenger on board that aircraft called Fred Camille. He worked for Anglo-American, and he had a beef against Harry Oppenheimer. So his personal assistant and a policeman from Libya, of all places, had dynamite on board this aircraft, and they threatened to blow up the aircraft, and the aircraft was hijacked and diverted to Blantyre. So here you have a South African Airways aircraft sitting on the runway in Blantyre. And at that time, Chris, all we could do is gooi mortiere, Patmos, and we can have 5.0 Brownings, and ons kan met Hippos and Caspers ry and so on. Okay? So here we're sitting with the aircraft of South African Airways, with South African citizens on board, on a foreign soil, and we're under pressure, and we do not have the ability to deal with it. What actually happened there was that the local police, or the army, whoever up in land, shot that aircraft full of holes. That's how they dealt with it. They deflated the tires, and the aircraft couldn't take off. And the way they dealt with it is they shot the aircraft full of holes. Till the day that aircraft was sold, they always had false alarms because of the copper jackets that were sitting in between the wiring of the aircraft. But that was the first incident that we were put under pressure as South Africans in terms of an aircraft hijack, way back in 1972. So the other thing that was very interesting about this case is that they were sentenced to 10 years imprisonment, but only after 8 months they were released. So we had Fred Camille, who fled then to Brazil, and you will see later on, when we talk about the Sky Marshals, later on he again threatened Oppenheimer, and again wanted to hijack an aircraft. And this is not necessarily common knowledge, but yeah, we'll get to that maybe if there's another episode on Sky Marshals and stuff like that. So that was the first incident, other than the explosions taking place of power lines being blown over, train lines being sabotaged, landmines being put on farm roads and stuff like that. So in 1974, Chris, 2 years after this incident, the railway police started a rural type of task force. The interesting thing, Chris, is that this was done at the infantry school in Oudtshoorn. So we worked with the Defence Force back in 1974, the railway police. So we would say that would be the start then of the task force, but more on the rural side, not so much on the urban side, with buildings and aircraft and so on. So 2 contingents were trained in 1975, and these contingents were deployed in Southwest Africa, on the railway lines, on the roads, bearing in mind that the South African railways had huge fleet of vehicles transporting goods, transporting petrol to the border, transporting food, transporting munitions. And those escorts were done in buffels from the Defence Force given to the South African Railway Police. Now, this is well documented. Some of the railway police were killed up there. Their names are on the wall at the Voortrekker Monument. Brigadier Ronnie Bale on our side, he's late now, spoke to General Gert Opperman, who was in charge there at the stage, to get their names also on the wall of remembrance, and it's there. So these things that I'm telling you are well documented. Nobody can dispute this or say, it's not so. Maybe people are saying these things because they did not know. but now I'm informing them. And if you go to our website, the South African Railway Police Special Task Force website, there's a book there written by Ronnie Bale that gives all of the different sections of the Railway Police, also the task force, also the border duties, being up in Natal, up in Namibia and so on. So I invite people to go and have a look at that as well, because the purpose of this course is the legacy. And the Railway Police definitely put up the hand and is part of the legacy of the statutory security forces in this country. These guys that were now trained at the infantry school in Oudtshoorn, they were also used extensively in the 1976 riots. They did VIP protection. Remember, many of the key points that were very important to the economy of this country were situated on railway property. Power stations were situated on railway property, power lines and so on. So these two contingents of gevechtsgroepen, as we call them, in the 76, they did basically the basic point training. They did weapon training, self-defense, map orientation, day and night, communications, small team operations, base protection, abseiling, camouflage, convoy planning, all of that type of stuff. Now, let us just go to our neighbors, just north of us. We go to the then Rhodesia, because the timeline is very important for us. We're talking now, we spoke 72, I'm now talking 78. In 1978, on the 3rd of September, we had the Zipra Owens of Joshua and Colmer shooting down an aircraft with SAM, a Strela 2 surface-to-air missile. Now, there were many South Africans on board that aircraft. And what actually happened there was the aircraft was shot, it did an emergency landing, it somersaulted in the field, and there were 52 passengers and 4 crew on board. 39 passengers were killed instantly. 10 survivors were massacred on the site by Zipra, who came there and massacred them. But some escaped. 3 passengers escaped by hiding in the bush, and another 5 went to go and look for water. They also survived. So here again, you have an aviation incident of a SAM surface-to-air missile being used to shoot this aircraft out of the ground. Now, recently, I was at the Voortrekker Monument with Kuvut, the unveiling of General Hans Draers' statue, and so on. And I actually went to the site where the passengers that were on there, their names are mentioned, and many were South Africans. And here's the thing, because it didn't end there. 5 months later, on the 12th of February 1979, the second aircraft was down, also by a Strela 2 missile. And here, all the passengers on board that aircraft were dead. So here, on the tip of our border, we started to see that aircraft are being targeted. And we did not have, at that stage in any of the statutory forces in South Africa, it doesn't matter if you're Defence Force or SAPS or South African Railway Police, we did not have the ability to deal with those situations. But also, let me just tell you that on the international stage, you had groups like the Baidamana. Now, they started off by hijacking and kidnapping, vehicles with VIPs and MDs and CEOs and so on. But they also migrated eventually to hijacking of aircraft. And they went through this in 1977. Again, look at the timeline. In 1977, they went through this thing called the German Autumn, with all the pressure being put on the German government and so on. And you will recall I said the primary victim remains the government of the day. So on the 13th of October 1977, they hijacked the Lufthansa flight 181 to Mogadishu in Somalia. And here, I think for the first time, we had the British SAS and the GSG-9 of Germany working together. And why I'm saying that, if my memory serves me correct, this is the first time that a stun grenade was used, which the British SAS gave to the Lufthansa to do the. So at that point in time, the Germans then became one of the leaders in terms of how to storm an aircraft. No country in the world really had that. And you will see how South Africa and my unit got trained by the GSG-9 amongst others, and by the Israelis. This was in 77. So, I mean, I can give you so many instances of aircraft hijacks, boat hijacks, and so on. But I just want to try and sketch a timeline for you, because that's extremely important. Now, as I mentioned, the government of the day should really decide who must do what in terms of the different statutory forces. And the railway police was then said, you are going to deal with all transport-related urban terrorism, aircraft hijacks, boat hijacks. And you'll see later on where we worked with the Navy and with the Air Force and so on. Train hijacks, bus hijacks, and so on. So that was identified by the government. And I mean, if they are the primary victim and they the government of the day, surely they will have the confidence in the particular statutory force that they want to do to diffuse that situation. I mean, if you go to the British SAS, their mandate says they defuse bombs, not the police. But if you go to the GSG-9 in Germany, it's the police unit. You go to your mum, it's a police unit. You go to the GIGN in France, it's a police unit. So the same in South Africa. The South African Railway Police is a police unit. Yes, we were railway police, but we were a fully fledged police unit. We did all of our training. When you become a commissioned officer, it was the same state president that signed your commission as any of the other officers in the other statutory forces. So the government of the day then definitely had, I think, confidence in the commission of the South African Railway Police to be able to deal with this. And once again, please remember that the aircraft that was hijacked, no matter where it was hijacked in the world, could become your country's problem within a few hours. That's a fact. Secondly, the pressure was on the flag carrier. If it was an SA aircraft, on that government. And you have the international press that is extremely interested and blowing the stuff out of proportion. Now, on the aviation side, you have ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization. It's a United Nations body. And you have a very similar one on the IMO, the International Maritime Organization, also a UN type of organization. And South Africa is a signatory to that. So also there, it says that each country must be able now to handle an aircraft hijack. It's an obligation. It's not something that you want to do. So aircraft hijacks started up. You will recall later on you had Lockerbie where the aircraft was blown out of the air because units started to get trained to deal with aircraft hijacks. So we could get on board and skop die gatte van daai ouens daar binne and then aircraft hijacks didn't take place anymore because there were countermeasures for that. And then you had Lockerbie where they actually put the bomb on board the aircraft, not the person or the terrorist or the criminal, whatever the case may be. And then it came full circle with 9/11. We had people hijacking the aircraft, actually flying those aircraft into the buildings. And that is why the sky marshals were put on the aircraft prior to that to prevent that if somebody is on board the aircraft. You can't do it from the ground. So there's a lot of stuff, of course, that I'm not going to go into detail, but I hope that with the confidence that I'm speaking and the experience that I have, people will accept what I'm saying. Ek het dit nie in 'n boek gaan lees nie, my vriend. Ek het hierdie goed gedoen. So we have a ICAO that gave certain guidelines and put certain obligations on governments, including then South Africa. So now, having set the stage, I'm trying to highlight what was happening in South Africa. I'm trying to highlight what was happening in the rest of the world. And we had these situations on land and on sea. And I'm going to give you some examples. Let me then start then immediately by saying, let me give you an example by sea. Because we forget these things, is it not? When last did we talk about the SAM-7 or the SAM missiles in the Rhodesia? But I've highlighted this. And I'm telling you where you can go and see it. But to remember that killer Laro passenger boat, 1985. This boat was hijacked by people from the PLO on the coast between Egypt and Israel. And you had a hostage situation on a passenger vessel. So that was a scenario that also the South African government had to look at. Let's have a look at a couple of terrorism by land examples then, just quickly. What about David Protter? Who can remember David Protter and what happened on the 29th of April 1975, where 4 people were killed on South African soil, not in the bush, nie in die stokke nie, yeah, in the middle of South Africa, in Johannesburg. 4 people were dead, 32 were wounded. It sounds like an ambush in a built-up urban area. So this had happened at the Israeli consulate, as you will know. There was more than 20 hostages that were taken. And even in 75, we did not have the ability to really deal with this situation. So this happened. Then remember the Silverton Bank siege that happened on the 25th of January 1980. Remember 80? When was the task force formed? 80. Timeline is important. So there you had these 3 MK cadres. I can give you their names, but I don't think that's important. You can go and Google it. They were on a sabotage mission. They saw that the police were following. They jumped into the Volkskas Bank, and there they took a whole lot of hostages as well. And one of the interesting things there, and it's not in my notes, but this is where the R4 rifle actually came from. Because of that bank siege, Meckham guys said, you know, the velocity and the caliber of the R1, the 7.62 versus the 5.56, it's actually started there. I don't think many people will know that, but it really started there. So that was the siege of the bank on 25th of January 1980, South African soil. We had David Protter, South African soil. Then in our border, right next to us, on the 15th of September 1988, when the Pope was here, a bus was hijacked in Lesotho. That South African forces defused that situation. So I'm just giving you examples of the pressure that was being put at that stage on the South African government. And obviously now the South African government had said, but how do we deal with this? Who deals with this? Now, in the late 70s, there was the State Security Council. Now, of course, this is important. You being a legal eagle will now know that this is where the mandate comes from. This is where the base comes from. All right. On the 12th of February, 1979, the State Security Council issued guidelines on who could authorize specifically 5 types of external operations. Listen to me, external operations by South African forces. If the mandate was given to the railway police to do the hostage release on an aircraft that is hijacked, and what could the scenario then be? An aircraft hijacked to South Africa, and I'm going to give you an example where it actually happened. 2, as a matter of fact, I was involved in both of those. But let's say South African Airways aircraft like the one to Blantyre is hijacked to Angola. Who then? I mean, the railway police can't go knock on the door and say we want to do it on SETA. So then the special forces of the defense force would secure the airport. The police would then do the railway police would then do the release of the hostages. So this type of stuff was decided by the State Security Council on the 12th of February 1979. Resulting from that, they released a Policy Directive 1 of 1980, which clearly stipulated this is the role of the South African Defence Force. This is the role of the South African Police. This is the role of the South African Railway Police. And it was signed by the Chief of the Defence Force, signed by the Commissioner of the South African Police, and signed by the Commissioner of the South African Railway Police. So that policy directive obviously now clearly indicated the task, the roles, and the responsibility of each of those units, and also the collaboration of the different units. Now that means you have to look at your training, you have to look at equipment, all of that type of stuff. Tactics, philosophies, budgets, and so on. That happened in 79. So I sort of tried to show you what was happening in the international arena in terms of aircraft hijack that started to move purely from criminal activities to terrorist activities to aircraft hijacks and so on. So I've indicated that there was now various types of terrorist attacks in South Africa and around the world. And those had to be allocated to specific statutory forces. And that was done by this policy directive. I can tell you, way back, Koos, in the 80s, for argument's sake, the sea piracy that we talk today, there were on our continent primarily two groupings, one on the west coast of Africa and one on the Horn of Africa that were hijacking commercial boats and so on. You know, everything that you need is found on a boat. Food, clothing, weapons, vehicles, whatever. And on each and every one of those boat hijackings, on each and every one of those aircraft hijackings, we sat and we did a toss. How would we have dealt with that? What was the weapons we would have needed? What was the equipment? If the ship is on the open sea, how do we get onto the ship? Do we parachute onto the ship? Do we use small craft to get to the ship? Day, night, etc., etc. Remember, this was in the beginning. So we then started to identify a couple of countries, like I said, the GSG9, the Yamam and Israel and so on, that already had advanced to have the training doctrines in place, have the equipment and so on. But you'll also recall in the early 80s, I'm talking 1980 specifically, there was a lot of sanctions against South Africa. So a lot of doors was closed to us and so on, and the pressure was mounting from all around the world. I think people actually thought Nelson Mandela's first name was Free, because everybody said Free Mandela, so he was Free Mandela. But okay, he was, but that's just a little bit of a joke. So you will recall I mentioned that the two contingents of railway policemen being trained in Oudtshoorn, and then in 1980. A platoon of 30 railway police members, of which I was a lieutenant at that stage, and Captain Ali Jooste was sent to Miljoenskop. Now, you will know, being an ex-policeman yourself, that was the rural training farm in Groblersdal. So we then went, a platoon of 30 railway policemen. We were trained by the South African police in counterinsurgency, the typical counterinsurgency. And I can remember this so clearly because on the 13th of May, 1980 was my birthday. And we did the Patmos at that day, and Boerleeuw was on fire. So I spent my birthday killing the fire on Boerleeuw. It wasn't fun, but I can remember it. It's etched in my memory. So that was the basis. We were doing this 6 weeks rural coin training. And I think it was the Friday afternoon. We ended that 6 weeks by giving a live fire demonstration to the generals, to the SAP generals, to the railway police generals. So they sat at a distance where we did a live fire demonstration, rifle grenades, live LMG fire, debussing, vuurbeweging, all of that stuff. That was done on the Friday. The Saturday, myself and Ali Jooste was put into the back of a police van. We did nothing wrong, but that was the only vehicle available. And we were transported from Miljoenskop to Kempton Park, where we both stayed. And that Saturday night, Ali Jooste and I was put on board a South African Airways aircraft to Israel. It was here around about June 1980. Now, that aircraft was full. There was no place on that aircraft. But we had to go because the training was lined up with the Yamam. The only place, Koos, that was available was in first class. Now, I'm telling you, first class on South African Airways is first class. And he said, you need to be a policeman. And we've just come out of the 6 weeks out of the bush on Stoneman. But we're sitting there and we're having a ball of a time. But boy, oh boy, when we hit that hot weather in Israel, we realized why we were there. And then our training started. We were embedded then with the Yamam. We wore their uniforms. We did all of their training and so on. And we were very well received because the general at that stage of the Yamam, General Zwiba, Brigadier General Zwiba, his son was a fighter pilot. Zwiba came regularly to South Africa. and he came in to shoot some of our kudus here and so on. So we had a very good working relationship. As a matter of fact, later on, if I can recall, he became the mayor of Ramat Gan, which is one of the 7 municipalities of Tel Aviv. And I went to go and visit him a couple of times, and he would leave his waiting room and with open arms accept me and receive me as his son and give me a nice hug and so on. So we had extremely good working relationship with them. So yeah, we're sitting now in Israel, and we started now with the urban training. In other words, aircraft hijack, boat hijack, and so on. But I think one of the things, Chris, that stood out to me was their manner of small arm training. You did not start off with a 9mm pistol. You started off with a .22 pistol, and you had to first achieve a certain level before you could graduate to a 9mm pistol. And here, for the first time, I actually was I'm talking about 1980. I was introduced to a killing house. So you would go please bear in mind, I'm talking about 1980 now, right? You would go into this room where you would have a big screen in front of you, and the persons being projected would basically be real life size. And it would be fairly dark, and they would first flash certain things, and then you have to shoot a certain target. The bullet would go through, and the light would shine from behind. So you could actually see immediately where you shot. And then electronically, those screens would just move, and the hole would be closed. So you would start gradually by shooting here, shooting there. Then you would start shooting, a guy further away because they made the photo smaller. Then you would start going to hostage situations where you would have a guy with a person in front of him, so all that is available is just his head. You have to shoot at the head. And I shot the hostage. And this guy shouted at me, lot off. Yes, I thought he was doing, lot off means no good. Get kak gemaakt, man. Yeah, you shot the hostage. So that level of small arm training was exceptionally good. Your graduation course, at the end of that, was to have, we used the 9mm high-powered Browning. Also for the aircraft, which is a very compact type of weapon. So with your firearm in your side, in the holster, with a jacket, you need to take away the jacket, draw your firearm, and shoot the 4-plate 10 meters away in under 1.2 seconds. That was the graduation, 1.2 seconds. And with the training and so on, really, we achieved that. And that was one of the qualifications also for the selection when we came back to South Africa. If you couldn't achieve that, you didn't go anywhere. Now, bearing in mind that all of the people that we trained when we came back were already fully trained and fledged policemen. And I can give you the assurance, my methodology course was the following, is that when a guy came on selection, the first thing I did, I gave him a case of 9mm ammunition, 2,400 rounds per student. And I said, go shoot. When you think you can shoot, you come back to me. And the first thing that I did is I loaded his magazine, and I would put 1 or 2 doppies in there without him knowing. So when he's shooting at the target and he flinches, it stands out like a sore thumb. And it was basically a RTU at that point in time, because this came towards the end of the training. So no flinging. And when we talk about the Sky Marshals, I'll tell you actually how we built mock-ups, shooting live rounds next to people sitting down. So yeah, we'll get to that at a later stage. So that really stood out to me is the level of training that these people presented in terms of small arms. We were trained on the M16, the American M16 rifle as well. And we did a lot of training, day, night. We did a lot of patrols and so on. So we were fairly confident that being trained by these guys who had a lot of experience already and the knowledge that we had, we could come and start up the Railway Police Special Task Force. I want to add also, Chris, and I'm not saying this being arrogant at all. We actually took and adapted some of that training to our own sort of environment and so on. So we really thought that at that stage our friends in the Yamam were one of the best units in the world, bearing in mind they were a police unit as well, and we were police. Something, once again, that I want to say, and please, I'm not being arrogant. I'm giving you the history. I was the self-defense instructor in the Railway Police College. So, ek kon nou slaan as ek moet en daai tipe van goed, and I had a black belt third dan. So the type of defense, self-defense that we were learning by the Israelis, we actually taught them one or two things. But they had other fighting styles, like removing a hand grenade with a pin pulled out and so on, which we learned again by them. So they were open also that we could interact with each other. But on the self-defense side, really we didn't learn much, because the style that I did was very similar to the Israeli style that they were doing. So we did all of the training, we calibrate, we got this 20 or the .22 caliber firearm, we migrated to the 9mm, and then we started to look at all the different type of trainings that they had geared up for us. Aircraft hijackings, abseiling out of choppers. And I can tell you that the fast roping, not the abseiling, the fast roping from the Puma chopper, the South African Railway Police brought to South Africa. We did not have our own choppers like the South African police. So we used 17 and 19 Squadron. And as a matter of fact, during the Durban TAP 2, we gave a live demonstration of this down in Durban. And that's also well recorded, it can be seen. So what was the difference between, I would say, the selection for the rural area versus the urban area? I think that's very important. So when we got back, obviously we had the training, we took a lot of photographs, we now had a lot of experience and so on. Now we had to say, how do we put this thing together? Because Israel environment is a little bit different. You will recall they have desert there. There's Masada down at the Dead Sea. There's Eilat, which is like a holiday area. So very similar to the South African environment in terms of the Karoo and Namibia and Durban and Cape Town, and so on. Because remember, all of that has an impact on the choppers deployment, and that at the sea versus the high veld, and so on. And then what we did is that we came back and we sat and we planned, how do we put this unit together? Because we were under tremendous pressure then obviously to do that. But maybe one thing that I need to tell you, being in Israel for so long, these guys, I don't know why, but they like to eat a lot of fruit and vegetables, and also boerewol vlees. So at one time, I was ready. I needed some protein. I needed some meat. So I spoke to our driver and said, you must stop at the supermarket. And he stopped, and I bought myself quite a large salami and some pocket knife. And I sat there in the gutter and I ate this whole salami. And I can recall, it's 40 years ago. I can recall the guy said, "You're going to eat all that meat?" I said, "Yes." He says, "You're going to surely die." But then I was not somewhere. And I think they was probably going to go and tell this to Generals Biba, because a day or two later, they tried to give us a barbecue on the beach in Tel Aviv on the Mediterranean Sea. But I think there was more sand on the meat that there was on the beach, that we ate it. The sand grounded in our teeth when we were eating the meat, but at least they tried to give us a barbie. So yeah, we enjoyed that. That was quite a nice gebaar van hulle kant af. So yes, we came back to South Africa, and we started to look at the training, what type of training that we need to do, and so on. So one of the things that we needed to cultivate, Koos, is the unity of the unit. Now, I think if you would look at a pyramid, and you would, let's say, the general population would be right at the bottom of the pyramid. We wanted to get to the cream, the people on the top of the pyramid, people who think the same, whose values are the same. with a certain level of IQ that was done by the psychologists, uithouvermoë, all of that type of stuff. And we had to try to determine what are we looking for differently on the urban side than on the rural side. For argument's sake, what we also brought in is hydrophobia. Were people scared of water or not? Acrophobia, scared of heights. What was the person's eye-to-hand coordination? What was his reaction time to a stimulus, and so on. Then the normal stuff of sleep deprivation, working under pressure, physical fitness. That's the normal stuff that any special forces guy goes through. You weet die vasbyte, die afkak voet and that type of stuff. So all of that stuff we took, but we also put additional stuff with. And we had with us our psychological department of the South African Railways that worked with us on our selection criteria. And many people will also say, normally with this type of selection, a lot of people fall off of the bus. And it is true, by us as well. So at the end of the day, you would end up probably with a 20-30% sort of selection criteria out of the bunch, depending on the course and the people that were on the course and so on. Then we had people coming from the different divisions of the police, from detectives, from the security branch, and so on. But within the unit, we had to establish different areas of responsibility inside the unit as well. So the basic special task force training, but also then we spaced in certain areas in that as well.
Een afdeling waarop die mag besonder trots is die klompie uitgesoekte manne wat die vlerkies van die spesiale taakmag op die bors mag dra. Kaptein E Olivier is die bevelvoerder van die spesiale taakmag. En as jy na hom luister, is dit duidelik hoe hy voel oor die manne onder sy bevel.
Die lede van die eenheid word uitgekies uit die mag uit in totaal. En hulle gaan 'n baie streng keuring na. En as gevolg daarvan is net die spesiale room van die mag sal ek noem dat uiteindelik by die taakmag aansluit. Een van die keuringsprosesse is 'n fase 1 en fase 2 sielkundige keuring. Die slaagsyfer is ongeveer 35 na 40% van die lede wat binne die taakmag uiteindelik opgeneem word. Daar is ander taakmagte. Elke afdeling het 'n afdelingstaakmag wat nie so hoogs opgelei is soos die spesiale taakmag nie. Maar die spesiale taakmag is oorbo in beheer van gijslaarsituasies en so. My taak as bevelvoerder van die eenheid oorspronklik was die stigting van die taakmag, die opstelling van die blokprogramme, die opleidingprogramme uitwerk, die keuringproses en dan instruksie gee. Daar is 'n hele klompie rigtings waarin die manne spesialiseer. Ons het skerpskutters in ons eenheid. Daar is van hulle wat redelik goed presteer het. Ons het duikers in ons eenheid. Ons het plofstofdeskundiges in ons eenheid. Ons het hondeafdeling in ons eenheid. Ons het 'n hele
So the high-risk nature, Chris, of being in a closed area, like an aircraft. We could put in a 747 jumbo jet, not the SP. The SP had 8 doors, but the normal jumbo had 10 doors. We could put 50 policemen inside that aircraft in about 2 or 3 seconds. Each with their own area of responsibility. So it didn't matter where the people were in the aircraft. We took them out at that point in time. So, and that's over and above the people that we did via the cockpit, via the nose wheel, and so on. And this stuff is general knowledge. I'm not speaking anything of referring to a special operation that we did. This is the type of training that was taking place. And everybody that wants to do the trouble can go and look at this. So I believe, of course, that any person that's done some special forces training anywhere in the world, you don't have to prove anything. Whether you're from the reconnaissance units or the South African Police Task Force or the old Railway Police Task Force, I don't think really we need to try and prove something. We know who we are, what we did. We are confident of what we did. But the important thing now at this stage of our lives, of course, is that we must never forget the people that paid the ultimate sacrifice. So, that lest we forget type of thing is important to us. That is why also today we have a get-together once a month of the Rowe Police Talkies, and also once a year, an annual get-together. This year it's in September in Bloemfontein. So we keep getting together. And on that note, I also have to give credit to my superiors, to my generals. And yes, specifically General Andre Horak is late. He had very, very good contacts with the Germans. Brigadier Gustav Erlang. He was way ahead of his time in terms of explosives and stuff like that. Now, what is important, Chris, coming back to the Rowe Police again, is that the Rowe Police also belong to international organizations like the associations of airport and seaport police. And these are where you typically would find the GSG-9, you'd find the Yamam, you'd find the GIGN that would be sitting on those things. And the commissioner of the Rowe Police was the chairman of that international committee. So through those committees, the doors were open for us to go and receive the international training that the Rowe Police Task Force then did. So, yeah. We came back and we started the selection, bringing people up from all over the country. And we tested the people, as I said, psychologically. We tested them with sleep deprivation, hand-eye coordination, acrophobia, claustrophobia, and so on. And very much based then on the Yamam. At a later stage, Chris, we also sent 4 of our task force people to Germany. They were trained specifically by the GSG-9. If you go to our website, you can see it there. You'll see the photographs. General Horak himself was there. Johan Lottet, who was my 2IC, when I left the task force, he became the commander. He was there. Louis Botha was there. And then Flip Schutter. Now, the interesting thing, of course, and it just happened, each and every one of the people that was sent abroad to the GSG-9 or to the Yamam just all happened to be instructors who did die deel 1 instructeurskursus in Oudtshoorn saam met die weermag. Except me, because I wasn't a drill instructor, I was a moer instructor. So I went to the college, but all of us did the methodology to be instructors. So even to become instructor, there's a selection process. There's not every Wehrmacht or police that becomes an instructor. So there already was a selection process. And all of us then we were instructors. And so when we came back, we had the ability to carry over that which we've learned. But let me bring this a little bit closer now to South Africa, and in particular then to the Rowe Police Task Force. Remember now, we were trained in around about June, July in Israel. We had to start up the unit. We had to get special equipment, which Arms Corps helped us with, special ladders and so on. But let me just remind the people, on the 26th of November 1981, what happened. We had the Air India Boeing 707 being hijacked from the Seychelles with Mike War down to Durban in South Africa. Now, his 2IC was Peter Duffy, and you can go and Google a lot about Mike War and Peter Duffy and what happened there. But in essence, there were a lot of South African Special Forces a part of that group on the Seychelles. And in essence, there was a shootout. There was a plan for a regime change. There was a shootout. There was a whole contingent of Tanzanian soldiers near the airport, and there were mortars being fired and so on. But of course, there's a couple of very interesting things that come out here that I want to highlight. One of those were the South African Special Forces guys on board, some of them whom we knew. And there was a Royal Swazi aircraft on the apron that got damaged by mortar fire, machine gun fire, and I even think it was shot with an RPG-7. That aircraft, that Fokker Friendship Royal Swazi aircraft, was hijacked later to South Africa. But that's the second one that I will tell you about. So here we have the Air India Boeing. 5 o'clock in the morning, it landed at the airport in Durban. The task force of the railway police was situated in Johannesburg near Jansmans Airport. So I'll never forget the call I got that morning to scramble the special task force, because we had a call-out procedure. There were no cell phones in those days. We used pages. I don't know if you can remember the pages. We used the pages. And then to phone the people and say, look, we had regular drills. To say, this is not a drill. This is the rendezvous point. Each guy had his trommel with all of his stuff in, report, and so on. The question was, how do we get from Johannesburg Airport to Durban Airport? So, because we were part of the transport section, they commandeered South African Airways Boeing 737. But now, to get your equipment onto that aircraft and allow the master to sign that equipment off, it's quite a challenge. So that was one of the lessons from the post-mortem that we took afterwards. And so what happened was we did a presentation to the powers that be, and we were given Treasury authorization. Remember I said to you, it was not just the police. We had Arms Corps, we had Treasury, we had a whole lot, Foreign Affairs, all were involved. So the railway police, and by name me, Andre Olivier, I was then a captain, had authority to go to a officer by South African Air Force headquarters, Major Denzel White, and I could task any aircraft I wanted. A Oryx, a Dakota, a Skymaster, whatever, because it was part of the statutory forces to address threats to the government. But the lesson learned was that morning of this aircraft that was hijacked, and we suckled to get the civvies to sign off the cargo that we wanted to transfer. So that was one of the lessons and where we could improve. So this was literally a year after our coming back to South Africa and starting up the unit that this happened. So obviously at each time we were deployed, we could learn something and add something either to our training or take something away, and to keep improving all of the time. So after extensive negotiations down there in Durban, the passengers were released, to say a long story short, and then we had to arrest Mike Hall and the people on board. All of the weapons that they had, an arsenal on board and explosives and so on, we did defuse those. That is why also you'll see part of our training curriculum was terrorist weapons, the AK and all of that type of stuff. As a matter of fact, we actually had a storeroom at Spescop, to General Kat Liebenberg nog daar was. We had a storeroom there. So we loaded all these guys on a C-130. Also the body of Mr. Fritz, who was shot and killed there. We took him out of the cargo hold, put him onto the C-130 with the other guys, flew up to Pretoria, where the people were basically detained. Later on, I had to go to the Pietermaritzburg High Court to go and give evidence down there on the case and so on. And in essence, they were all sentenced to 5 years imprisonment, and after 21 months, that they were released. So that was our first hijack on South African soil way back then in 1981. Yes, let me just think a little bit. So just to sort of recap, if you think now this Policies Directive of 1980, they actually foresee at that stage we could have had a hijack. The hijack happened. And because of their foresight, and because of the policy directive, and because of the training, we could handle that situation effectively. So the government of the day had insight to do the necessary and to allocate and delegate certain tasks to the statutory forces. So I think anybody who wants to come and argue today that, you know, the railway police shouldn't have done it, or this or that, or whatever the case may be, I would beg to differ. And by giving these examples, I can say, really, I think that the government knew, you know, what they were doing. One of the important things also that I want to mention, on the 20th of May, 1983, opposite the South African Air Force headquarters, directly opposite, is the Correctional Services, die Bewaarders headquarters. And with the Church Street bomb on the 20th of May, 1983, myself and my 2IC at that stage, Johan Lotte, was giving a lecture to the Correctional Services on the recognition of tow weapons and bombs, onthou die kreefmyne and the F1 handgranaat and that type of stuff. And normally after that, you would stay for a bit of cool drink, and so on. But we were there with an open bucky with all the stuff at the back, and the weather looked bad. And we were parked right in front of the Correctional Services headquarters. They blocked an area off us, directly opposite Air Force headquarters. And we said, no, we have to leave because of the weather. At that stage, I loved to drink cool drink. It was quite nice. But we left. And we were gone 5 minutes when the Church Street bomb went. So if we took a little bit longer, or if we stayed for a beer or so on, we would have been in that explosion. Once again, of course, I saw God's hand in my life. And I can tell you on many occasions, I can give you an example upon example upon example where God's hand was on my life, where He protected me. So I give all the honor and glory to Him. So that is just in passing. How small things were happening in the world that was raakvlakke, tussen different things. So let's go back to this Air India hijack. So what happened was this aircraft on the ground at the Seychelles, when it landed, the Air India hijack was damaged. The flap of the aircraft was damaged. So they just taped that up and they flew with that aircraft to South Africa. So because our training then included, as I said, buildings and aircraft and trains and vessels and buses, because we'd already acquired our equipment, and we've 2-3 o'clock in the morning, we did our training, in the hangars at Jan Smuts Airport in the winter. We were ready for something like this. And I say again, I think the government of the day made the right decision. Our special type of training over and above that, the bomb technician training, the sky marshal training, we had divers in our unit. We did some parachute training, although parachute is more rural orientated, but we did do some training on that. Sniper training, hostage negotiations. My hostage negotiation number is 10. I have my badge, it's number 10. And you'll see I'm going to talk about a hostage negotiation, which I actually did. We did abseiling, fast roping out of the Alouette Mark III, the Puma. We did VIP protection courses with National Intelligence. We did the monkey teams. We did canine training. You'll see, I think, on our website where some of our dogs are abseiling with us, and so on. So we did all of the training that the Special Forces overseas did, and then also locally. Then, as I said, we had 4 of our guys embedded with the GSG-9 in Germany, got additional information and training there from them, different equipment. I think what I would like to also add here, of course, is that the distinct difference between the GSG-9, the German guys, and the Imam, the Israelis guys, is the equipment and the use of equipment. The Germans had state-of-the-art equipment in Mercedes-Benzes, where the Israelis, Israel being a very small country, is a little bit bigger than the Kruger Park. They would use the old RPG-7 bag, have water pipes they would screw together to scale buildings and stuff like that, and it worked. So we sort of had a mixture between these two. We had the best of two worlds. We had the Israelis that actually improvised a lot, and we had the state-of-the-art equipment. So the state-of-the-art type of equipment that we got was our helmets, the box system, and so on. But then we also had some very unsophisticated equipment that worked extremely well. We had a 5-story building in Gazerne in Johannesburg. It was a huge building, Chris. So we could practice live firing in the building. We could do penetration exercises up the lift shafts without being seen, climbing up the water pipes, the monkey teams. We could use TNT to blow open doors, for penetration and so on. So we really were blessed with the training aids that we had, with the support that we got from the highest level of government. All the state departments, all the state machinery was there to help and to assist us. And our sister forces, really, we worked extremely well with the South African Defence Force. So at one stage, we sent some of our guys to to the 1 reconnaissance regiment. We did training with the recce's. We did the basic and advanced demolition courses with them. We did the urban warfare course with them. So there was interaction with the defense force. The police, SAP at that stage, not so much, because I think there was more professional jealousy and so on, but we worked extremely well with the defense force. 17 and 19 squadrons. We worked extremely well with these people, with the Oryxes, with the Allos. And as I said, we even gave a live demonstration during the TAP 2. Now, maybe I can tell a story there as well. Before we could get the fast roping, which is one single thick rope, we were still waiting for that to come from overseas. We put together a couple of thin abseiling ropes, and we tied it at certain areas. So we actually, during the TAP 2, we did like a bus that was hijacked, and we came in with the Oryx, abseiled, and did the hostage release and so on. Now, what happened was we actually were at the base at the reconnaissance unit, and we take off from there, come over the stadium, and abseil. Now we have a thing, and you'll see later. I'll talk to that. Whoever tied the rope goes first. Whoever does something that could jeopardize somebody goes first. So I tied the rope, so obviously I went first, also being the senior officer there. And as I went down the rope, my foot went through the rope, and I was literally in front of thousands of people, hanging upside down on my one leg on the rope, and everybody abseiling sort of over me. And I think the people probably thought that this was part of the show, because they were clapping hands. But now they want to throw off this rope, and the chopper wants to leave the stadium, and I'm hanging upside down. So I literally opened up the rope and did a backwards flip out of the rope onto the ground. And we had 2 special forces doctors embedded with us in our task force. They were in our unit. So I could report to one of them. They could patch me up after the show. That's just in passing. I can give you so many of these stories over the years. Now, we also, as I said, we're looking at the possibility if a boat is hijacked. Now, at that point in time, the economic situation was this. If a boat was hijacked and blocked the Durban port, factories would close in the Rand area within 2 weeks. So we said, what is the different scenarios? We could have a boat that is hijacked next to the quay in the Durban harbour, or any harbour. Or we could have a boat outside the harbour, which is at anchor. Or we could have a boat on the open seas. How do we get onto this boat? So one of the things that we wanted to do was then to see, by means of abseiling, and you can see the Israeli special forces that are doing it now today, with Iran and all of that type of stuff. I'm talking, of course, in the 80s. This is a long time ago, but we were leaders on this area. So what happened was, we asked, I mentioned his name, Brigadier Erland, to talk to the Chief of the Navy. We wanted to take a strike craft out onto the sea, come in with the Oryx, and physically land on that strike craft. Ek het nie geweet hy dink so klein bees uit die lug het. But in any case. So we then went to Major Denzel White. We tasked the Oryx helicopter. We then flew down to Durban. And I then went to the Navy base there in Durban. And I was a captain there. And the base commander was a vloot captain. So in other words, a full colonel. So I went to him and I said, Captain, this is what I'm here for. We want you to take a strike craft out to sea and so on. And he had not received the signal at that point in time. So he said to me, you're mad. We can't do that. The ropes will go into the propellers. It will pull the helicopter into the sea and. And of course, what I'm telling you is really is what happened. So I said to him, Captain, can I please use your telephone? Once again, there were no cell phones at that stage. He said yes. So I took the phone. I phoned my brig. My brig said, stand by. I put down the phone. My brig then phoned the admiral. The admiral then phoned the captain at the base. They said, kom ons ry. So we actually started up the strike craft, and he went out to sea. Now you must just think, Chris. I can promise you to this day, I'm not a scared person. Ek skrik regtig verbitter min. But I also want to tell you that day, dis die bangste wat ek nog ooit in my lewe was. Because what you have this strike craft below you, and the strike craft is going up and down in the ocean, is rolling from side to side, is going from the front to the back, and you have these antennas, and then it's under the chopper, and it's not under the chopper, and so on. And when you're abseiling, you only have so much rope. So at the end of that rope, you're going to swim. And there's some huge propellers at the end of that aircraft. And you're landing on the rear side of the aircraft, of the boat. So having said that, you can go onto a website, you'll actually see, there's photographs on our website where we actually did that. And you know, once you on the deck, you can then manipulate the chopper for the other people to come in. So we really trained hard, and we really exercised hard. And I think it was the old Russians that you say every drop of blood you spend during training, you save a liter of blood during actual war. So we really trained hard. We trained regularly, and it's like any training syllabus, you know, because you've got a lot of training, a lot of different disciplines. Every now and again, you have to do refreshers. So a lot of our time was doing training and retraining and recertification and so on. Now, we actually had some unwritten doctrines in our unit. Of course, you're going to like this one. Number one, we said if you tie a rope or whatever, you go first, ongeag jou rang. Number two, you lead by example. You never ever gebruik die kruiwaarstelsel. The officers didn't ride on motorcycles to go with, you ran with. Each and every Friday, we had a fitness test, including the officers, including myself. And the results of that fitness test was published every single Friday. And then every Friday, ons het die rooi lappe uitgebring. That's the boxing gloves. So any guy who had a gripe against any guy, ons het mekaar dik geslaan, and then on a Friday afternoon, we went to our watering hole. And that's how we ended, except the guys there, obviously, that were on standby and so on. So that was an unwritten rule by us. Ons het mekaar gewetter, but we never ever had a grudge. And the unity that we formed, the aggression that we could get out of people, and also test that aggression was there. Now, another piece of news, because the railway police had a training farm in the Addo area in Port Elizabeth, very similar to Meluskop, a huge farm. It had a huge dam on this farm where we could, with the oryx and with rubber ducks and so on, also do certain operations. If you go onto our website, you will actually see some of the photographs there as well. So we had this training farm down in the Addo. I think with the amalgamation, it went over to the South African Police. I think they're still using it. But what happened there is that we had to now go and give a demonstration. Now, I'm talking now about the special task force of the railway police. Had to give a demonstration on the farm. But this was sort of now like an urban demonstration. So the demonstration would have been a car where we detonated a rail landmine under the car. And toe ons nou vuur in beweging gedoen met so, geweergranate, and we did an attack on a house with live ammunition and so on. So we were down there a couple of days beforehand on this farm in Slagboom, and there's not very many amenities there where you could relax. So the guys were ready, they were sharp, and at that stage we had one Casper and one Swerver. I don't know if you can remember the Swerver. It was a smaller type of Land Rover APC that to take a driver that sat in the middle with four people. It was much smaller than the Casper. But about 30 kilometers away, there was a hotel called the Commando Kraal Hotel. So the guy said they want to know, just go and have a relax before this big day tomorrow, because the minister also came, the Minister of Transport, some senior generals and so on. Everything was prepped and everything was ready. So I said, that's fine, let's go. And we put as many as people in and on top of the Casper that we could, and in and on top of the Swerver, and off we go to the Commando Kraal Hotel. So the guys were playing a little bit of snooker and it was getting late. So I said, guys, we're going back to the base. So some of the senior warrant officers came and said, Kaptein, kan ons nie net 'n bietjie langer bly? I said, okay, you will be in the base at this point in time. So I took the rest of the guys on the Casper back to the base. So I'm sitting going through all of the planning and that again for the big day tomorrow, because the ministers that will be flying in with the chopper, and you know, Ronnie Bale was at that stage the commander there. So I'm sitting talking to him as well. But I'm also looking at my time, and it's now almost an hour later that those people should have been back in base, and they were not back in base. So I think, you know, the commander will tell that baie lekker gegaan op daai stadium. And there was a gravel road about 30 kilometers to the commander hotel. So I got one or two of my guys. I started the Casper, but I drove it myself. Want ek was baie kwaad op die stad. So heading back to the commander hotel, I see these two little lights coming. So I knew it was the Swerve coming from the front. But at that stage, Chris, I rammed that Swerve with a Casper. And it had that canvas over the wheels. Daai goed het afgeval and all that. I remember we got a demonstration with the ministers the next day. So I actually literally had to tow that vehicle back to the base. And I said, then you'll work right through the night and you'll get this vehicle ready for the demonstration the next morning. So they sort of, with wire, tied some of the stuff back to the vehicle and so on. And I said, right, when we detonate that landmine tomorrow under the vehicle, make sure that that Swerve is very close to that landmine. So when that landmine went, we blew off all of those pieces, so I could write off that incident under the oefening. So it was quite fun. And yeah, I think during that session also, I personally put the pips on the minister, and I made him an honorary colonel of the Railway Police Special Task Force. So it was fantastic. And once again, if you can get this film Draers from the Lourierkrans, you'll actually see that demonstration that I'm talking about. Of course, I've done in my career most probably about 40 different courses, 40. I'm talking about nationally, internationally, and abroad. I've been seconded to the Ciskei Police. I trained their special task force down there. I've trained the special forces of Ghana. I think it's the 61 Brigade, if I can remember. I gave lecture to the GSK courses of the Defence Force, the Joint Staff course, and specifically that went on the role of the Railway Police in counterinsurgency operations. I've trained members of the South African Police Service as Sky Marshals. I can give you some photos on that, or we can talk about that in the next interview. I've done work up in Africa. I've done national plans for governments. So in '94, Chris, I was then actually sent from the task force to the Ciskei Police. And I was a captain at that point in time. And during that time, while I was in the Ciskei Police as a captain, the amalgamation, that's 1986, the amalgamation took place between the South African Police and the South African Railway Police. It became one police force. So obviously at that point in time, I came up to Pretoria. I did my majors course in the South African Police. So I was then appointed first as a captain in the railway, in the SAP, then a major when I did my course successfully. And then I went back to the Transkei. And then you will recall, of course, I was talking about Fred Camille that hijacked the aircraft. Information came through that they were going to hijack, or he was planning to hijack an aircraft from South America. At that stage, we had two aircraft routes, one to Rio de Janeiro and one to Buenos Aires in South Africa. So I was in the Ciskei still training people there in the Ciskei, and I received the phone call from Lieutenant General Andre Worak, who said they're going to desecond me because we need to address this threat. Please remember now, this is now the South African Police, because we were amalgamated, not the Railway Police. Railway Police did not exist anymore. So as a major, I was deseconded and sent up back to Johannesburg, Jan Smuts Airport. My wife was very unhappy because being seconded, we lived in an embassy house, and came back, we lived in a police woonstel. Duty called, and we were here. And one of the big things that was happening is that we were putting sky marshals on board the aircraft, and I was not happy with the level of training, the level of people they were putting on. But I will talk to that in the next episode. So I came up then as a major, and I was then the commanding officer of the Sky Marshal unit, which was a full-time unit. And from the SAP task force at that stage, there was a Captain Herman Smit, which came across as my 2IC. So I was a major, he was a captain. I later on was promoted to lieutenant colonel, and later on I went down to Graaf Reinet, to the police academy, where I did my full colonel's course, and I completed that successfully as well. So being now back up in Johannesburg with the Sky Marshals and so on, what happened was, I'm just trying to think of my words, there were a lot of people deployed which had relations in the police that should not have been there. You know, mense se kinders en that type of stuff. So one Sunday night, it was on the 5th of July 1993, as a full colonel and as a trained hostage negotiator, I was sitting in church minding my own business, and my bleeper went off, and an aircraft was hijacked to Jan Smuts Airport. Now, like any officer in the police, you've got a week that you're on duty to attend shooting incidents, or your bomb disposal guy is on duty, and your hostage I was the hostage negotiator on call. So remember, I referred to the Fokker Friendship that was shot to pieces on the Seychelles with the Air India. This aircraft was hijacked from Mozambique to Jan Smuts. It was the same aircraft. It landed at Jan Smuts, and at that stage, I had to go to the control tower to do the negotiations. So the ATC guy that was there at the stage, a very good friend of mine, Arthur Bradshaw, was doing the initial talking to the captain and so on. So I took over from him. So there was a lone hijacker on this aircraft, armed with the AKM, which he smuggled on board in a bag of dog food. And of course, on the airport, he fired shots inside the aircraft through the skin of the aircraft, because he wanted to fly to Australia, and that aircraft could not reach Australia. So he wanted fuel. So part of the strategy was to say, okay, if we can get some of the people off, we'll give you fuel and so on. So that was one of the strategies. And then also, because we know the aircraft types, we know where you can talk in an aircraft. So if I'm talking to him personally, I know he's in the cockpit. So I asked later on to speak to him personally, not to the captain. But the problem is he can only speak Portuguese. So I had to get a ground hostess from TAP, the Portuguese airline, that I could translate through her to this guy. And being alone on the aircraft, he helped himself to the bar. So he was like a drunk, and he very strong and slim and aggressive as well. So he would swear at this hostess, and she would get upset, and she would swear at him in Portuguese. And I could only determine that from the body language and not from what they were saying. It was probably one or two words, I suppose. So in any case, what happened was I said, right, we'll give you fuel, but we want somebody to come off. So he released the two hostesses that were on the aircraft. And the funny thing is, one of those hostesses was also on the aircraft, and it was shot in the Seychelles. So through that, we could determine how many people were on board, what were their weapons, what was the objectives, and so on. So at one stage, he forced the pilot to take off during the negotiations. He forced the pilot to take off, and they did not have enough fuel, so they then landed again. So we knew we had to act. But Botha was the acting state president at that stage. on a Sunday evening. And in this negotiations, now you have all of the generals phoning you or trying to talk to you because the ministers and the president or the acting president wants to know. And that's one of the few times in my career I told a general to get stuffed. I'm not going to talk to him because I'm busy negotiating. So what happened was we knew we had to penetrate that aircraft. And I spoke to the people that were on the ground. And one of the things was, maybe just in passing, one of the courses that we did as the Rower Police Task Force was how to refuel the aircraft. So we had guys in shell uniforms at the aircraft. Captain Charlie Nudier was there. So I had comms with him. And the task force then deployed. And I spoke to the hijacker and I said to the task force, go. So when they opened the front door, it was by the cockpit. The guy was shot in the head. The interesting thing, it was shot with a 9mm. It did not penetrate his head. It ran around but he was knocked unconscious. And the guy who did that was a member of the South African Railway Police Task Force that went across to the South African Police Task Force. So once again, the synergy is there. We respect each other and we work together. So long story short, me and Captain Jakkals, we went to Mozambique to go and investigate the case, and we went to court and so on. The captain was shot in his leg. He agreed that if we did not penetrate at that point in time, everybody would have probably been shot dead and so on board the aircraft. Fortunately, there were not very many people on board the aircraft at that point in time. So then, of course, 93 came with the new dispensation in the country, and they needed all the police that they could for the elections that were going to take place. So I did a stint as the commanding officer at the police air wing in Pretoria. At one stage, it was General Blackjack de Swart who was the commanding officer, and then Brigadier Bill van der Merwe was his 2IC. But when Blackjack finished, Bill took his place, and I took Bill's place as the commanding officer of the police air wing. So because they wanted to withdraw the police from all of the airports, the commissioner of the police said that he's going to second me to sit on meetings to negotiate the withdrawal of the police from the airports, because private security had to take over the task from the police so they can deploy the police for the elections. So I sat on that committee and we did all the planning. We actually hired a whole technicon near Gold Reef City to train all these private security people, 650 in total. Remember the X-ray machines that the police were using and to check baggage. It now became a city thing because of the commercialization and so on. So I was very much part of that as well. And it was probably as a result of that course, I was headhunted then and asked to head up the newly formed Airports Company of South Africa Security Division. And I finished and resigned from the police on the 15th of December, 1993. On the 16th of December, 1993, it was a holiday. I started my new career and started to train, but still worked very, very closely with the police. I had 23 years of service at that point in time, resigned as a full colonel, and I was now in Civvy Street. Then in 1998, the then Minister of Police, Sidney Mofamadi, seconded me to the National Interdepartmental Structure for Border Control. It was chaired by the Deputy Minister, Joel Marcus. And this had a look at border control issues. So I served there for 2 years on this interministerial committee. I also was seconded by the Minister of Transport to look at the National Aviation Security Committee and security plan. So I also did this for Namibia. I did the national plan for Namibia, the airport plan, the national plan there. So I was very involved even after leaving the police course on aviation security and so on. And then, as you know, after that, I then went up to Nigeria, and of course, that's where I met you. And I'm so glad. And look at the circle once again. Here we are sitting a couple of 10 years, 11 years later, talking, still buddies, still friends, trying to leave a legacy of what really happened and so on. Now you'll recall, Koos, up there we had about 64 expats. I think all of them except two were all divorced people, all carrying baggage. And on a Sunday, I used to have church services for them and so on. A lot were suffering from PTSD. And as I alluded to earlier, Ben de Klerk and so on, he really wanted to commit suicide. So we were there and we could reach out. What am I doing currently, Koos? Now in 2022, I'm currently the Managing Director of OTT Solutions. OTT Solutions is the group of 4 different companies. Amongst others in the company is LMT, which was bought from Denel when Denel went belly up. So all of that IP and that resides in our company. There's OTT Solutions. I manage OTT Solutions. On my board, Koos, is Lieutenant General Romano, the previous chief of the army. Brigadier General Fiedler is on the board. And then we have LMT, we have ADG Mobility with Dr. Stephen Nelsitz. We have OTT Technologies. And of course, we can literally design a vehicle from scratch. It doesn't exist. We can design it. Also, amphibious vehicles we've designed for the UAE. And that is what I keep myself busy with these days. But amongst that, I'm also busy as a pastor, as you know, as a marriage officer. But I am a bit of a maverick, a bit of a renegade. I don't preach and work for a salary. I'm a tent maker like Paul. I pay my own way, so I can speak that which I believe the Lord wants me to say. And if there's something not going according to the word of God, I can dust off my feet and I can walk away. So I don't think I need to apologize, but if anybody who wants me to apologize, my apologies. I'm sorry. So I also want to maybe conclude this section, Koos, by saying I'm so grateful to every single person in the South African Railway Police, in the SAP, in the Navy, at Armscor, in Treasury, that I had the honor to work with, and to a certain extent still work with. I see it as an honor to be able to share the legacy of this little part of the statutory forces in South Africa, the Railway Police. And hopefully I brought some perspective today in the Railway Police Special Task Force, and the role that we played in the history of the statutory forces in South Africa. So once again, Koos, thank you for this opportunity. Really, I appreciate it. And Godspeed on your travels. I know you're looking at other countries. I know you have certain plans. I bless you in the name of Jesus with what you're busy with. Thank you, my brother. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Then I have to ask you, we briefly touched upon it. What is the difference between a criminal and a terrorist? And how do you deal with each? Because I'm sure it's not the same animal.
Well, that's actually a very good question. And this question is a question that was debated internationally at the United Nations level. Bearing in mind that a freedom fighter to one country is a terrorist to another, and a terrorist to one is a freedom fighter to the other. So the United Nations, via the Civil Aviation Organization, debated and had arguments about this for many, many, many years. So out of the IMO, the International Maritime Organization, and also out of the International Civil Aviation Organization, what was then agreed upon by all of the countries, including now Russia and China and everybody who's part of the United Nations, is that a hostage situation is a criminal activity. For whatever reason, it doesn't matter. It's an international crime, it's a trans-border crime, and it's a crime that puts pressure onto a government. So it's a criminal activity. But a criminal activity, Koos, is also done for different reasons. There were many hijacks, for argument's sake, particularly in South America, where aircraft were hijacked purely to gain money for drug activities or criminal activities. Then there were aircraft hijacked by mentally deranged people. For argument's sake, there was a Aer Lingus aircraft hijack many years ago, and the purpose of that hijack was to convert the Pope to Christianity. He's the leader of a couple of billion Christians, so. But that is why, Chris, the perception is that the terrorists are more prominent in hijacking aircraft than criminals or mentally deranged people. It's not true. What is true is that a terrorist, when he hijacks an airplane for political purposes, one of his objectives is to get as much media coverage as possible. So the media would cover that much more than a guy that just hijacked it for criminal activities. Because the terrorism side brings the state into it, and pressure on the state, and on an aircraft or a boat, several states and countries. So although terrorism is also criminal activity, the decision was to look at hijacking as a criminal activity. And then for what reason? Terrorism would be one subdivision of then that section. That would typically be the difference.
And it is so, I've seen this in the police and afterwards, that the terrorist is not necessarily going to flee. He's not a criminal. He may not want to run away. He wants actually to confront the police or the security forces, get himself in the shootout, get all the media attention, things like that. So you deal with a more desperate type of person. And I'm sure we're going to talk about negotiating too, because I have good news for you people here. I spoke to the colonel and he says to me, we can actually do an episode on what to do when you are actually taken hostage. Because this is very common these days. I mean, if you are hijacked with your car or you're overcome in your house, well, these guys breaking in and they got a naval against your head, you are actually a hostage.
Yes.
So you need to know how to deal with that, and you need to know how to deal with it afterwards. And that brings me to the second last question. I know you have these wonderful video clips and videos on your YouTube channel. Which one, sir, would you tell us to go and look at right now when we're done with this one?
Chris, once again, a very, very good question. Remember, PTSD is not just us veterans. A person that has been through a violent farm attack or a violent hijack could also suffer from PTSD. So there are basically there's about 40, 50 different sermons there. But what I would recommend immediately that's available is a sermon called Damaged Goods, Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3. And then PTSD, Part 1 and Part 2. But if I could be so bold as to say, first look at the damaged goods, Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3. Because you see, if you have lost a limb during that PTSD episode, or an eye, or whatever, you need to deal with that. But the psychological scars is actually what we need to get to. And that is what those three videos as damaged goods and also the PTSD. And they're all short course. They're 10, 14 minutes long. And I deliberately keep that, to keep the content relevant and short, because most people don't have time, or the attention span is short because of other commitments and so on. So those three, damaged goods and PTSD.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I would once again say to people, and yes, his lovely wife here behind, say hello to her.
Hello.
I'm being spoiled with a cup of coffee.
Thanks, Doc, and she's a lovely person, I can tell you.
Thank you. Appreciate.
I did look at the two PTSD ones. They're really good. And I think that Satan actually tried to prevent you from making the one PTSD video.
Yes.
Perhaps you can tell us about that, because that to me is a clear sign that you actually have to go and look at it. And I'm definitely going to leave the links here in the description as well as at the end of this video. Please go and have a look. But what happened there? What did Satan do to you that day?
Chris, it happened over several sessions where I tried to record the first PTSD video. Only after the third or fourth attempt, I could get it right. You know, on many occasions, Chris, and I know a lot of people don't operate at this level, and I respect that. But you know, the demonic world and the unseen world is very real. And when you get involved with trying to heal God's people, you get these demonic attacks. As a matter of fact, of course, when we were in Nigeria, I received an attack in my room that night. I could physically feel the demon on my bed and so on. And might I add, this was the second time I was very scared in my life. And I admit it. And I couldn't speak or get anything out. But when I could get the word or the name Jesus, that demon had to leave me. And the same thing, I've been around the block course a couple of times. I'm not a kid anymore. I'm 68 years old. And I've got a lot of experience. And on the Christian side as well, my radical bekering came, Chris, when I was an elder in the church. If I died at that stage, I would have gone straight to hell as an elder in the church. So I'm talking from revelation knowledge. I'm not talking about other things. And yes, on 3 occasions, I was stopped by the demonic activity. I don't want to go into that detail, but through the power and the authority that we've been delegated in Jesus' name, I could get it out. And, you know, as I said also in my interview, you got to have a mandate. You got to have a legal basis to work and to have power and authority. And also on the spiritual side, you need to have a legal basis. And I know what that is.
Thank you for that. I just want to make a last statement here before we go, because we've been speaking almost 2 hours now, would you believe? But it was so fascinating. Thank you. I know many of you listening here are actually bushfighters, post factors. You are guys who are experts in counterinsurgency. What we're talking about here is urban counterterrorism, where it happens in a city. That makes it very, very hard. But the reason I think, and you can agree with me or disagree, Colonel, is that it's man to man. This is as personal as it can get. Once you got that terrorist or criminal that is violent, and he might be trained, he might even have an army background, we don't know. Once you got him trapped somewhere, and once that order is given, like people like you, the commanders, for us to go in and take him out or take him down, blood is going to flow. Someone is going to die. There's no such thing as getting the mortars in or getting the Air Force in to soften him up. Yes, you have the snipers covering your ass, and you can trust those men, and they will open up. But at the end of the day, it's for you to actually take your whatever weapon you have, go through that door with your mates, get the right target, because you cannot shoot the wrong person there. It's not acceptable. If you kill the wrong person during a hostage negotiation or hostage situation, sorry about that, there will be a murder trial afterwards. The detectives are going to take over that scene and treat it as a crime scene, and they're going to ask you questions whether you acted correctly or not. In fact, when the SAS stormed, was it the Iranian embassy in London?
Yeah.
In about 1980. Of course, they had to get permission from the police first. Now, the system works in the UK is they will hand over formally to the army, to the SAS, and sometimes the IRA people actually surrendered right at that spot. But that's the system. It's not like that in South Africa. It used not to be. The police are there, they are in control, and they would then go in. But afterwards, the MP5s, the Heckler and Kochs, were actually taken by the police to be checked ballistically. And there were all sorts of stories that they were trying to shoot these guys afterwards. Lots of liberal crap. So what I'm trying to say to you also, and we'll talk about this in detail, there's a great responsibility in this specialized field, because nothing you do will not be scrutinized. Am I correct, sir, if I summarize it like that?
You are 100% correct, Koos. I think also with your legal background, being an advocate, you will know. If you in the bush, or as we used to say, in the stocker, and you throw a 500 kilogram bomb or mortar or whatever, you withdraw afterwards, and there's no investigation. But typically in an urban environment, you have the media there. As a matter of fact, that is sometimes very much to your detriment, because the media will be outside the hostage situation, like the David Crotter type of thing, recording and saying, but the police are here, they're abseiling down, they're doing this, and so on. So you're absolutely correct. And when anybody dies on an unnatural cause, there has to be an investigation. And the drill is there for the crime scene investigators, what they do and so on. And remember, I said to you also, Koos, that we are involved in the armament industry, both locally and abroad. The violence in the country currently, in South Africa, I can actually send you a photograph of one of our cash-in-transit vehicles in South Africa, in an urban area, was shot 300 times with the AK-47. The mag changes that take place is like the Wild West. We have explosive devices being placed on the vehicles in urban areas. So the reality is there, the investigations are there. The post-traumatic stress is as much today as it was that time. I don't know, you saw recently the ex-Starkey guy that was trying to be bumped off and so on. I mean, there's another situation in broad daylight recently on the N1. A hijack of money took place, 400 and something thousand or something like that. So the reality is there. And that's why I also say that, yes, I agree with you. The investigations will take place. It is completely different. It's in a very confined area, whether it's in a house or whether it's in an airplane or whether it's in a bus or whether it's in a train. It's extremely confined. And that is why your training had to change. Your selection had to change. Your equipment had to change. And maybe, if you go back to the British that were deployed, I think it was in Borneo those years, they used a sort of shotgun in the jungle because the 303 rifle couldn't work. So and I said to you, we made some adjustments to equipment and to training philosophy when we got back to South Africa. So you're absolutely correct. I agree with you. I unfortunately will not go into any specifics, but I agree with you 100%.
Well, I'm looking forward to our future episodes. We're going to have fun here. I'm really grateful that you are back and that we can get hold of your legacy. We are creating a legacy. So I'm asking all of you, please come and talk to me. Come and tell me your story. Because there's a lot of things which happened which will never be in a book. I mean, I've written many books myself. I can tell you, we tend to look at the big picture. We rarely ever have time to go and look at what the constable or the troopie did or the sergeant. It's not that important in the overview, in the big picture. But for us here at Legacy, that is actually the things we are interested in. We want to know why, where, what, and so forth. So thank you, sir. We appreciate it. Until next time, for the rest of you as well, God bless.
Thank you very much, Koos. Stay blessed and keep up the good work. We appreciate it.